you today? So, because of issues that I feel like I've been having with not being provided access in spaces, and where I feel that people who are supposed to moderate the space really didn't, in my opinion, um, I felt like, that would be a good live stream topic for Deaf Awareness Month. How to moderate a deaf, um, friendly space. So I figured we could talk about that a little bit. And so that's what our 17th video is going to be about today. And what we're going to talk about is just a quick one. I'm going to try not to ramble too much, but I am me, so good luck with that. Um, but we're going to talk about accommodations in real life and online. We're going to talk about dealing with discrimination, and we're going to talk about cultural awareness as well. Um, and I really think like everything I'm discussing can apply to anti-discrimination in general because it's intersectional in terms of applying the concepts, but we're going to just focus for Deaf Awareness Month on deaf issues specifically here. Um, so yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna roll my intro. And oh, you know what? I don't know why it says Frederica. It said without further ado because I was about to roll my intro, but um, I said roll, not throw. Anyway, fucking. Also, I want to mention, before I get started, again, like everything else that I discuss on deaf issues, just to reiterate, we are not a monolith. And so this is my take from what I've processed so far on my own lived experience. But of course, other deaf people may have a different experience than me. But this is just what I've processed so far. So, yeah, keep that in mind as well. All right, let's do this thing. Hi, my name is Lexie, aka Deaf Child. I'm born deaf, hard of hearing. My team was one of the top teams between 2020 and 2024 in New Orleans and Louisiana. I began doing business as Deaf Child in 2013, marketing 2011, and sales 2009. I've earned 50 plus certifications in marketing and sales, and I have my Bachelor of Science from Loyola University, New Orleans, with a music industry studies major and a business administration minor. Visit my site at noladeafchild.com. So, first of all, just kind of want to discuss with moderating deaf-friendly spaces. Well, step one would obviously be we need accommodations. And so that can look a little different in real life versus online. So in real life, every deaf person is going to have, well, in both cases, because every deaf person has a different lived experience, we have different access needs. And that's also one of the reasons we don't get access, because a loophole in the law is basically that abled people can decide, or hearing people can decide for us what accommodations we need. And if we don't like it or if it doesn't work for us, we're supposed to get over it just because they offered something. But the issue is, just because they're offering an accommodation for them doesn't mean it gives us access. So we're still being discriminated against, only it's legal. Um, and so with accommodations in real life, like some deaf people need sign language interpreters, right? And for me, sign language interpreter gives me access sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. Here's why. In some cases, no matter what, I'm not going to get any information and there's going to be loss of information. And so having that interpreter is better than nothing. But for me, in a lot of cases with interpreters, I get a loss of information. And so it's better for me to communicate directly and I will get more information that way. And that way I'll have more access. Um, so that can depend on the situation as well. Like, for example, am I in a public place? Am I in a group setting? Are there 10 to 20 or more people there? Then an interpreter would be helpful for me. But is it one-on-one? Are we at a round table? Do I have my hearing aids on? Is there a controlled audio space and it's not loud? Then I'll be better not having the interpreter, and because that's going to have loss of information and I won't have the same level of knowledge of what occurred as everybody else, because I'll be so focused on trying to communicate with the interpreter that I won't be able to focus on having multiple conversations at the same time, and I will miss out on things that are going on. That's for me, right? But then, like other cases, it's like if I don't have an interpreter, then I have no access because there isn't that chance for me to have that conversation to understand what's going on. And so the best chance I have of knowing what's happening is the interpreter. And in other cases, it can be like a mix of both, where because I don't have to keep up with other things, um, I only have to watch something that's happening and watch the interpreter. Like say I'm at a play, for example, right? Um, then it's actually really accessible for me to have both. Somecom a lot of times is very accessible for me. I love Somecom. But it's not accessible for all deaf, right? Because I use Pigeon Sound English, and that is acceptable for a lot of deaf like me who, and I said Pigeon Sound English, not sound. Anyway, um, fucking, that is accessible for a lot of deaf like me who don't grow up with that different language structure of ASL. But then for other people who grew up with ASL, it's like that's not acceptable because that's putting it in a different word order where it's more work on them, right? And so every deaf person needs different accommodations. And then some of us, we need different accommodations for different scenarios. And so you can't just like slap a band-aid on it and be like, that's gonna be it every time. Legally, that's what they do in order to cover their ass, and that's how they claim that they're providing access, but in reality, as we've discussed, it's not. And so that's how there's this legal loophole to where we basically just don't have the accommodations, right? And that's real life. But things you can do, like, one-on-one moderating your own space. A lot of deaf people, we can never get rid of like having notes, passing notes back and forth. If that's available, if you know that you're gonna have deaf people over and you're in a mixed deaf hearing space with people who don't sign, then leaving paper and pens everywhere so that way deaf people have access to be able to communicate is one way to go. Um, Making sure you have places for deaf people to charge their phones and stuff like that too, because a lot of deaf people will be using apps on our phones to communicate with hearing people. Um, in real life, sign language interpreters, hiring sign language interpreters as often as possible for those who need that, who it's accessible to, as well as asking every deaf person what they need for their access. Each deaf person has a different access need, and so you can't just expect one thing to work for everybody. Um, and things, just like asking them what would help them be accessible. If you're in a group setting and it's somewhere where you can control the environment with the decor, like deaf people, we do really well with round tables, because we can see everything that's happening and read everybody's lips, and so that way we're not like, versus if it's a rectangle, I'm not going to be able to see the person four down from me and read their lips, right? But if I'm at a round table, I'll be able to look across and read their lips, right? So that can matter. Or if the decor could matter, right? So like you have things in between people, like vases, tall vases, or are there going to be a lot of columns around? Like, what can we do with this space to where we can encourage gathering in areas where there's going to be a deaf-friendly space to gather and conversate, right? And understanding, are there going to be barriers? Or say you're serving deaf people, don't place anything that's going to block deaf people's vision from signing and communicating with each other. Things like that. Like, there's just different ways you can accommodate deaf people in real life, but the key thing, ask each deaf person what they need and follow their accommodations, and do so for everything. And if there's someone who's going to be in your life long term, you can go ahead and ask them in advance, like, hey, are you going to need different accommodations for different scenarios, or well, one thing, do you just need an interpreter all the time, what's going to work for you? And some people, they may give you one answer now, but later down the road they might process, hey, actually I need a different accommodation. And it's up to you not to be a fucking dick about it. Anyway, and now online, how can we accommodate captions? Oh, and this one is a mix, online and in real life, because sometimes in real life you'll be watching things, right, together. Also captioning things, and then turning captions on when you're watching things. And if you don't know how, then you can communicate with someone to figure out ways that we can get things captioned. But making sure you have the captions. And this one's gonna go for is connecting in real life to online. And then online also with accessibility for deaf people, we also have to put that into reflection with deaf representation that is connected. And so you have to make sure you're giving deaf people the access to representation on deaf issues by letting deaf people represent us online. So yeah, there's just like a lot of ways. And then providing accommodations for us online in terms of, if we ask you to caption your stuff, if a deaf blind person asks about transcriptions, I'm still not good at that. Um, and I'm deaf blind, so I guess internalized ableism. But look, we're trying, we're learning, and we're gonna be doing better, right? And just learning how to reconsider what someone else is going through, right? And so yeah, sometimes people will be like, can you pay for an interpreter for an online meeting? Um, Things like that. Those are things that you can do to provide accommodations. Learning sign language, turning captions on when you do online meetings and things, and just putting in that effort. Now, in regards to moderating deaf-friendly space, another issue is dealing with discrimination. One of the biggest hurdles with how hearing people moderate spaces when it comes to discrimination is that they cultivate environments that perpetuate it or normalize it and tolerate it, right? And so that's the key to moderating a deaf-friendly space, is you gotta nip discrimination in the bud. You've got to stop that. So for example, I tried to address the Amy Robinson situation, and that's a bad example of moderating a deaf-friendly space because, well, it's a good example of how to poorly moderate, right? Because she allowed her followers to hear explain why it was okay for them to discriminate against me using deaf slurs against deaf people, and speak over me as a deaf person on these deaf issues. So when you're moderating a deaf-friendly space, on top of trying to decolonize with your own language and not discriminate yourself, it's also about not allowing other people to discriminate in your space as well. And there's a level of which decolonizing journey we all have to learn, right? But if somebody is saying this is discrimination, you know, and you tell people, hey, that's discrimination, and they stop, then good. They learned, right? But if they're going to keep going, that's when you say, no, we're going to block that, we're going to stop that, we're going to remove that from our space. And if you're not doing this type of thing to hold your space and your audience and yourself accountable with discrimination, you know, then you're not moderating a deaf-friendly space. Um, on top of, do you even have deaf people there? If you don't have deaf people around, it's definitely not a deaf-friendly space because no deaf people, right? Um, so yeah, there's things like that. Keeping that in reflection with discrimination, basically thinking about decolonizing, truth and reconciliation, anti-discrimination, and understanding where is the line in value alignment for you on, okay, we're all humans who need to decolonize our language, so on a certain level we have to work on that, versus where is the line where it says, okay, obviously you're not trying to work on decolonizing at this time, so we have to put in parameters to maintain safety for anti-discrimination, right? Like, so understanding these lines for yourself, I guess. And I know what those lines are for me. And in my space, I just feel like, when it comes to certain situations where I've put in a certain amount of effort of trying to educate you and I don't feel like you're listening or caring, then I'm not gonna be able to maintain that connection or support rather. And then sometimes it'll be like a situation where maybe this one person didn't fight back with me on the discrimination I saw them do, but recently I've been dealing with so much of this discrimination that I just can't take it anymore. That can be a thing too. Like there's these different ways that this can happen for me and for you too, I'm assuming. Everybody has like a different boundary. And so, but it's just understanding what is your boundary and factoring that into moderating a deaf friendly space, understanding if deaf people don't feel safe in your space, you're not moderating a deaf friendly space. Okay? So, yeah, and that comes back to cultural awareness. Deaf people, we have our own culture. And so, um, when it comes to moderating a deaf friendly space, you also have to leave room for those cultural differences. And like one of the biggest cultural difference is in hearing community, it's considered rude to call you out on discrimination, right? Because they perceive it as an attack. When hearing people get told they're discriminating, they don't really care that they're discriminating. They're going to argue more about why are you pointing out they're discriminating than, oh, I'm sorry I caused harm, let me stop. You know what I'm saying? And the hearing people, they often do the whole reverse discrimination card. So many hearing people will tell me I'm discriminating against them if I don't want hearing people to tell me about deaf issues. You know what I mean? And so you have to have this understanding that we are our own ethnicity. We are an ethnic group. We have our own language. We have our own cultural norms. We have our own way of approaching things. And that includes conflict resolution and problems and how we address calling out fucked up shit. Now, not to say deaf culture isn't problematic because it's highly tied to colonialism, as I've discussed, via the formation of American Sign Language. But at the end of the day, it is the preservation of deaf accessibility. Um, and so, to that end, if you want to moderate a deaf friendly space, you have to respect our culture. You have to respect the way we approach things. And you have to respect us when we try and let you know about our accommodations, about discrimination, about preserving our language, right? And giving us access in these spaces. And so, keeping all of that in mind is how you can start to consider and reflect on how you can moderate a deaf friendly space. So, yeah, just to wrap it up, today we just talked a little bit about accommodations in real life and online. We've talked about dealing with discrimination. We've talked about cultural awareness. And we've talked about how this all ties to providing a conducive environment for hearing and deaf people to connect and ways you can reflect on things like that. And oh, another thing I forgot to mention also when it comes to like accommodations in real life, and this ties to deaf culture, like so in deaf culture, there's like I mentioned, we have these different cultural norms. One of them will be like we'll turn the lights on and off to get people's attention. Or like it's not uncommon to tap someone on the shoulder to get their attention. However, I would say each that can be pretty general. It's typically okay, but every deaf person is different. Some deaf people they don't want to be fucking touched. You know what I'm saying? So don't just go tap a random deaf person on the shoulder if you don't know them like that. You know what I mean? But like if you're ever engaging in a deaf space and that happens, then that's like a cultural norm. These are things. And I'll have to go into like a whole nother live stream, I guess, to even try and like scratch the surface of that, which I don't feel like I can do right now. But yeah, it's just understanding, um, we have a different perspective. And I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to moderating a deaf friendly space, they're so used to hearing cultural assimilation because that's what's normalized, that they expect us to do all of the work to maintain the hearing cultural assimilation, but they're not willing to bridge the gap by meeting us, by respecting deaf culture. And so that's also something to reflect on as well, I think. But yeah, thank you for your joining me today. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great night. And thanks for marinating on all of this for this Deaf Awareness Month. And yeah, bye. Thanks for watching. Join the loyalty program at noladeafchild.com/loyalty and check in during live streams to get points for rewards.